China and Taiwan might be on the brink of total, all-out war. In the eyes of many, including senior U.S. military strategic commanders, we're already in extremely pivotal years regarding this issue. There's a ticking clock for China to invade Taiwan, something that most people don't know about, and it's something that we're about to reveal in this video today. Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, John Aquilino, spoke in a testimony to his Armed Services Committee recently and confirmed that all indications point to China's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, meeting President Xi Jinping's directive to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. But get this, four-star Air Force General Mike Minihan has stated that his gut tells him China and Taiwan will fight it out in 2025. Whatever the case may be, it's pretty clear that China has its eyes on Taiwan, and they're trying to get their way as soon as it's possible. They don't really have a choice, actually. Needless to say, this isn't good. A clash between these countries could devastate the world. Consider China's military arsenal in comparison to Taiwan's. It's literally 3 times bigger, with the odds of victory leaning in China's favor based on just hard numbers. And if that happens, the US might have to come to Taiwan's aid, tangling them in a much-dreaded nuclear face-off with China. That'll definitely be one face-off the world won't survive. You see, in the last few decades, China has made very key advances in critical modern warfare capabilities, including in domains such as cyber, nuclear, space, the deep seas, supersonic, and electromagnetic weapons. And even though this is the case, it still isn't content with its military profile, so it's recently announced a further 7.2% increase in its defense budget. A budget that's already the world's second, only to the United States. Currently, the US leads the world in defense spending with its proposed budget for 2024, totaling $842 billion, roughly a 5% increase from before. However, according to the latest reports from European think tanks and US intelligence analysts, the budget declared by the Chinese government might not be accurate. The real Chinese defense spending is at least 30 to 40% higher than the official budget, bringing it just below $500 billion instead of the reported $230 billion it has officially claimed. And quite a lot of it's going towards beefing up the world's largest Navy fleet. It plans to deliver its 3rd aircraft carrier and 3rd amphibious assault ship, which are coming along nicely, with several additional guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and frigates also on the way. At this rate, China's Navy will soon be able to make long-range precision strikes against land targets from both its submarine and surface assets. But it's not just the Navy. The Chinese Air Force is also building an advanced unmanned aircraft fleet. If counted together with the Chinese Navy's air assets, it now makes up the largest aviation force on that side of the continent. If you didn't already know, China's Air Force is on a trajectory to possibly becoming the largest in the world, aided by its 5th-generation fighter, the Ju-20. Even more worrying, over the last 12 months, China built 100 new nuclear weapons, at which rate it will gain parity with the US nuclear arsenal by 2032. All this firepower ought to make China more responsible about its use, but instead, over the last 2 years, it has indulged in over 280 coercive and risky air intercepts. Meanwhile, the Chinese Navy has also been intimidating and coercing fishing fleets operating not only in the Western Pacific, but as far as Latin America. Basically, all this Chinese aggression could result in serious consequences for them in the long run. All that's required is one miscalculation. Experts insist that all this military spending and advancement by the PLA has one goal in the short term. It's to take back Taiwan. But would the US and Taiwan's allies remain indifferent, twiddling their thumbs as Chinese forces march across and invade the island? Not likely. The US is certainly committed to keeping Taiwan safe from any Chinese adventurism by indulging in some adventurous politics of its own. An example of this is Nancy Pelosi's hush-hush visit to Taiwan, which turned into a media circus the minute her plane touched down in 2022. So much for hush-hush, huh? Basically, while Pelosi took the opportunity to reiterate American determination to defend Taiwan during her visit, the Chinese military demonstrated exactly how angry this visit made them and how serious it was about achieving its own goals. While she was there, 27 Chinese warplanes crossed into Taiwan's self-declared air defense identification zone. 2 of these formations even crossed the median line in the Taiwan Straits. Next, she was treated to live fire drills in 6 zones that effectively encircle Taiwan, only 100 miles from China. This was closely followed by 11 ballistic missiles being launched from mainland China into the waters north of the island. Pardon the sarcasm, but this display of affection was aimed directly at the United States and was intended to shock Washington into behaving itself and not intruding in China's backyard. But on the world stage, most don't learn from past mistakes. That's why the same was repeated in 2023 when Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen defied China's warnings not to meet with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. Beijing took out its anger on Taiwan by simulating a blockade of the island, sending an aircraft carrier and 12 naval ships to encircle it. They even flew 100 warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone during a 3-day military drill. So this really begs the question, why are the world's most powerful countries squabbling like children over this little place? Well, Taiwan is a tiny island in the northwestern Pacific Ocean, roughly 1,300 miles southeast of China. It belongs to a group of 168 islands that are officially part of the Greater Republic of China. The main island is spread over an area of almost 14,000 square miles, roughly the size of the Netherlands. Taiwan is separated from its arch nemesis, the PRC, by a narrow stretch of water called the Taiwan Straits. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles long and 81 miles wide at its narrowest point in the South China Sea. This strait is extremely important as a major global shipping corridor through which 44% of the world's container fleets have moved in just 2022. The data is a good indicator of its importance on the global level, and as a result, it's important that it should remain open for passage at all times. This availability of passage is being attacked due to conflict between the People's Republic of China on the mainland and the Republic of China, based in Taiwan. Frequent crises between the two occur on the Taiwan Strait, which happens to be wedged between them. The two countries are vastly different from each other, even though they were born within the same motherland. That should have made them bosom brothers. Instead, they've always had a lot of tension. To understand why, we have to look at China's past, so that we can understand its future. If you didn't already know, you're watching another Republic exclusive. A Tale of Two Sons. The Sino-Taiwan conflict's history goes much deeper than what can be seen on the surface, and its roots lie right at home, mainland China. There's a very long story that lies behind the conflict, and it starts much earlier than the Civil War. In fact, its foundation was laid by China's conflict with this country, Japan. You know, China and Japan have gone to war not once but twice, with hostilities breaking out for the first time for control over Korea. Things heated up to such an extent that both fought their first war from 1894 to 1895, ending with China losing the port of Weihaiwei, Taiwan, the Penghu Island, and the Liaodong Peninsula, and, of course, the Korean Peninsula. Hostilities only ended when the Imperial Chinese government of the Qing dynasty sued for peace in February 1895 at great cost to its land, coffers, and prestige. This defeat brought down the whole house of cards, setting off a revolution in 1911 that caused the ultimate end of dynastic rule in China, and that's basically when Republic of China was first established. This brought the revolutionary Sun Yat-sen into the picture, who was declared the Republic of China's first president. He was the one who established the nationalist party called Kuomintang, or the KMT. Keep this nationalist party in mind, because it'll be mentioned a lot. Basically, the KMT was the first party created during the Sino-Taiwan conflict. During this time, various attempts were made by monarchy loyalists to bring back the emperor into power. These attempts fractured China into many regions controlled by warlords by 1916. You might be wondering by now, when did the Chinese Communist Party, aka the CCP, appear on the scene? Well, it was founded in Shanghai in 1921. At that time, China was fragmented, with various warlords controlling different regions. To unify the country, the KMT, led by Sun Yat-sen, formed an alliance with the CCP under a strategy known as the United Front. This alliance was encouraged and supported by the Soviet Union, which provided the KMT with financial and military aid on the condition that the KMT cooperate with the CCP. After Sun Yat-sen's death in 1925, Chiang Kai-shek took over leadership of the KMT. But tensions soon arose between the KMT and the CCP, despite their initial cooperation against the warlords. In 1927, as Chiang consolidated power, he became increasingly wary of the CCP's influence within his KMT party. Chiang later launched the Nanking Incident and a brutal purge against the communists in what became known as the White Terror. On April 12, 1927, he ordered the mass execution of communists in Shanghai, marking the beginning of the Chinese Civil War. During the purge, thousands of communists and their sympathizers were killed, and many more were executed across other cities. As a result, the Soviet Union cut ties with the KMT, and Chiang Kai-shek emerged as the dominant leader of the KMT, establishing his government in China. This government of the Republic of China ruled over limited parts of China from July 1, 1925 to May 20, 1948. But, as this map shows, the administrative rule of the KMTs over China was quite limited in the 1930s. During this time, Chiang Kai-shek was given massive amounts of military and economic aid by the United States. In fact, the nationalist KMT government even became one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council in 1945. The rivalry and mutual dislike between the CCP and KMT party turned vicious and led to an all-out civil war, which continued till December 1949. Japan's second invasion of China during the Second World War from 1937 to 1945 reduced the Civil War to intermittent clashes, but it resumed as soon as Japan was defeated, a defeat that came at a significant cost to China, but with much help from the Allied forces. The Allied West was waking up to the rising threat from the East in the form of communism and extended their support to the KMT in hopes of suppressing the CCP. But by this time, the CCP had developed strong grassroots, superior military organization and morale, and was strengthened by large stocks of weapons seized from Japanese supplies in Manchuria. By this time, corruption and mismanagement by the KMT eroded its support. This period is generally referred to as the Chinese Communist Revolution, and just so you know, it was supported by the CCP's oldest friend, the Soviet Union. So, the Chinese Revolution succeeded. It defeated the KMT and drove it to the foothills of Burma, which is today known as Myanmar. Then from there, its loyalists and leadership withdrew to Taiwan, where they declared the Republic of China in 1949, whereas the CCP came to rule over the People's Republic of China on the mainland under Mao Zedong's leadership. So you see, that's how Taiwan and mainland China became 2 unique entities. The cycle had finally come full circle, one which had begun with the Chinese Revolution of 1911. The CCP's victory was considered the fall of mainland China to communism, which was followed by the United States suspending diplomatic ties with it for decades. The pieces had fallen on the geostrategic chessboard and have been moving around with China and Taiwan separated for nearly 100 years. But this game goes deeper than mere philosophical differences or a bitter past now. There's a lot of money and power politics at play here, which could turn the region into a flashpoint. In fact, we're getting really close to it as we speak. The identity crisis. Since they declared independence, China and Taiwan have progressed into advanced and very rich nations at a breakneck pace. The PRC, or mainland China, has carried out reforms in its economic policies, which have paid great dividends. Today, it stands as the world's second largest economy by GDP, a tiny smidge behind the United States. Since its reforms, China's GDP growth rate has increased by an average of 8.93% per year through the last 45 years. This growth accelerated further in 2023, bringing China's GDP to 17.89 trillion US dollars, with a natural increase of 5.2% from 2023. The year 2024 is rumored to dip China's economic growth, but that won't make much of a dent in its giant economy. China's economic, military, and diplomatic growth is at full speed on all 3 fronts. With one of the most enormous armies on the planet, the most extensive navy fleet, and a huge cache of intercontinental ballistic missiles, China is no pushover, and it's set its sights now on its historical brother to rival, Taiwan. Hey, by the way, are you enjoying this video? Please do us a huge favor and hit that like button. Also, make sure you subscribe and tap that bell icon so you never miss out on brilliant new content from our channel. You're officially part of the Republic now. Since the separation, the mainland PRC has not minced its words in verbalizing its intentions regarding Taiwan. Beijing has repeatedly stressed that there is only one China, and Taiwan is an integral part of it. In fact, it's called the island a renegade province and vows to eventually unify Taiwan with the mainland. According to its One China principle, the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government in China. That's all well and good for China, but Taiwan has taken a similar but reversed stand on this point. Immediately upon its independence, the KMT recognized China, Mongolia, Taiwan, and Tibet on the South China Sea as parts of the Republic of China, with its base in Taiwan. But it fell short of declaring independence, since that could trigger a military response from its brother across the Taiwan Strait. Instead, it has consistently called for closer ties and a peaceful coexistence. Though both China and Taiwan enjoy a close economic relationship, things are entirely different on the diplomatic front. China has worked very hard to isolate Taiwan on the international stage, and it has used its financial and military clout very effectively to deflect diplomatic recognition away from it. In fact, the PRC has a policy of not accepting relations with any country that has recognized Taiwan as the legitimate government of China. This tactic has worked out pretty well since, due to its efforts, as of 2023, only 13 countries in the world enjoy formal diplomatic relations directly with Taiwan, and no, the United States isn't one of them. China is an economically and militarily powerful country. All countries want to do business with it. So where does that leave Taiwan? Pretty isolated. A rushed invasion, back to where we sort of started now. After witnessing China's extreme reaction to the Pelosi visit, the US planners realized that they must be onto something, and it was very likely that China would launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan in the next few years. That has the potential of pulling the United States into an all-out war with an emerging superpower, and could lead to some pretty devastating consequences for the rest of the world, including the global economy. Albeit, the more important question is why the situation is changing so rapidly this time, even though the two countries have been in friction for more than 70 years. China has played it very cool so far, but recently, its approach to issues regarding Taiwan have taken a 180-degree turn. The question has been settled. China will attempt an invasion of Taiwan given the right circumstances. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of when. There are many factors making the answer to this big question very tricky. Some of them are internal to China, while others are external factors. Threats of a Chinese invasion within this decade are likely because of China's internal ground realities. The first of these is its demographics, that will be taking a nosedive in the next decade. A population growing old will not be beneficial for an all-out invasion, which is why this decade seems to be the best time for making its move. China's basically planning, according to what it sees happening in the future within its borders. On the other hand, even though the Chinese government set the goal of achieving 5% GDP growth within this year, while in reality, its economy has stagnated at 4%, and it's expected to shrink even further in the coming decade. So the circumstances are just right. Time is basically not on China's side. It's running out. They don't want an old population to fight a major war, and economic growth is kind of beginning to stagnate. That's why it's been working day and night to build its military arsenal and modernize its facilities. China is also keeping a very close eye on the military readiness of the United States, Japan, and you guessed it, Taiwan itself. And that's probably also why it's pushing its military spending as high as possible, as close as it can to the biggest shark in the ocean, the United States, keeping the enemy at bay. Fully aware of the fact that its time is running out, with China's growing impatience, Taiwan has formulated a three-pronged defense strategy of its own against a possible invasion. Since the possibility of reunification with China is growing exceedingly slim with each passing year, Taiwan knows that it must be prepared for any eventuality. As a starting point, the Republic of China, based in Taiwan, has retained its claim as the rightful sovereign of mainland China. It has never come out as an independent state, but has reiterated time and again that it is still a part of a greater collective China. This is the cornerstone of its diplomatic defense, while it has also tried not to give an excuse for China to launch an invasion. But more importantly, just as China's demographics are changing, so are Taiwan's. The 2024 elections in Taiwan were full of tensions in the wake of the Pelosi and Tsai Ing-wen visits, which led to what some call the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. The message was loud and clear as the missiles flying close to the island flew like reminders that any type of misadventure by Taiwan would be met with a response. With these events, on January 13, 2024, the historically pro-nationalist Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP, became popular due to its fiercely Taiwanese nationalist stand. On the other hand, the KMT candidate Ho Yui and the Taiwan People's Party candidate Ko Wen-je advocated for a more accommodating stance toward China. The Taiwanese people would not have it, as this accommodating stance was losing a lot of popularity. Consequently, Taiwan elected Lai Ching-te, much to the displeasure of Beijing, which is opposed to the DPP for apparent reasons. The data coming out of Taiwan shows that as of 2022, an overwhelming majority of people in Taiwan, a staggering 65%, identify as Taiwanese instead of Chinese. As far as China is concerned, this statistic represents the growing disloyalty to the mainland. So China has reacted by refusing to engage with this administration due to its pro-independence rhetoric for the last 8 years. Within days of the inauguration of President Lai Ching-te, China launched a series of drills it described as punishment for separatist acts regarding the new president in office. The purpose of the drills was reportedly to test China's ability to seize power over Taiwan. Now, Taiwan knows that it might not be able to deter China from an all-out attack based on diplomatic moves, so it has chosen to use economics to woo China. This is the second prong of its defense strategy, aimed at making it too costly for China to carry out an invasion. You see, Taiwan was very fortunate to have a stellar economic planning team. They devised a brilliant economic reform plan to transform a raw material-starved nation into one of the most technologically advanced industrial sectors of the world. If the aim had been to make Taiwan too valuable to the world to be ignored if attacked, then that aim was achieved. This is the silicone shield, an industry specializing in taking care of the most expensive and laborious manufacturing side of microchips for the entire world. So how did Taiwan do it? It successfully convinced companies from across the US, Europe, and Japan to outsource their manufacturing processes to them. Companies like AMD, Nvidia, Intel, IBM, Sony, Broadcom, Qualcomm, and Apple all availed its services. That's just the tip of the iceberg, though. Today, a company called TSMC produces nearly 90% of the world's most advanced microchips that are even used for AI and quantum computing applications. TSMC is the firm behind all of Apple's custom chips, and they also supply CPUs and GPUs for many high-tech brand names. Taiwan's share of global semiconductor production stood at about 46% as of 2023, followed by China at 26%, South Korea at 12%, the US at 6%, and Japan at 2%. The industry earned more than $175 billion in 2022 for Taiwan. And according to a study carried out by the US State Department, a disruption to the industry would cost nearly $2.5 trillion worth of losses per year to the worldwide economy. This would leave financial devastation across the globe in its wake. Significantly, Taiwan exported chips worth over $47 billion to China in 2023 alone. China accounted for 12% of Taiwan's net revenue in the third quarter of 2023, jumping by 8% within just 1 year. These numbers demonstrate a certain level of dependency between the two, which cannot be overlooked by either of these adversaries. In an event like an invasion or blockade, a worldwide financial crisis would erupt because these semiconductors are essential supplies required for manufacturing cars, computers, cameras, and other home appliances. This also includes sensitive military equipment like guided missiles for fighter jets and artificial intelligence systems. Taiwan's silicone shield is so valuable that its influential customers would almost certainly force Western powers to come to its rescue if China ever launches its attack. Incidentally, China will also be vulnerable to that disruption as it imports $100 billion worth of microchips from Taiwan, leaving it vulnerable in case of such a misadventure as well. Taking over the established industry after the invasion would not be an option for them either, as there's no guarantee the factories would survive an attack. There's also the fact that Western powers may impose sanctions on them out of spite, despite the reliance they have. Since its manufacturing depends on raw materials from all over the world and the availability of technically trained labor, an invasion would be an extremely risky option. With all this risky business, the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act in 2022 by the Biden administration in the US is recently the biggest plan in the works. It's designed to provide $52 billion in federal subsidies to companies for setting up manufacturing foundries in Arizona to boost America's own indigenous chip production facilities. The US is tired of paying good money to Taiwan for something American companies used to do. The idea is to build back America's chip manufacturing share from the current 12%. back to the 37% it had enjoyed in 1990. It was perfect for the United States, but awful for Taiwan, which didn't have its monopoly over the microchip industry and whatever deterrence it today enjoys against a Chinese invasion. It's a bold move, but not an easy one, given the cost of manufacturing anything in North America also comes at a steep cost. But in any case, this move has planned to destroy a very delicate balance between the PRC and Taiwan. If the US were to succeed, this move would seriously chip away at Taiwan's silicon shield, but the worst of it was yet to come. The Biden administration went one step further, curtailing the sale of sophisticated microchips to China by its allies. Keep in mind that sophisticated microchips are more advanced than just regular microchips. That's what this move is about. The move would hit Taiwan the hardest because it limits them from producing something China still depends on them for. While China had been dependent on Taiwan for its microchip production, it would have thought twice before launching an invasion in the past because of the sophisticated microchips being available to them. Now, in terms of military strategy, Taiwan has aimed to make an invasion so costly that a victory would be meaningless for China. Since the PRC does not enjoy a land connection with Taiwan and would have to cross the Taiwan Straits, it would need to devise a huge landing force based on hundreds of transport ships and deploy around 1 million military personnel. This move would very easily be visible to the United States via its satellites, well before an attack. China would have no surprise element in such an undertaking, which would cause its costs to soar to unmanageable levels. Even if the forces could take off over the Taiwan Straits without being intercepted, they would find very limited landing beaches on Taiwan's shores, and the 14 beaches that can possibly be used for that purpose are already extremely heavily guarded. Despite all of its planning, Taiwan knows that any chance of survival is based on a presumed intervention by the United States, which would feel obliged to save Taiwan. Even if we compare the Russian invasion of Ukraine with that of Taiwan by China, there's very limited things to be learned, since Russia's advance was facilitated by its long land border with Ukraine. Crossing the Taiwan Strait would not only be tricky the first time for China, but keeping transportation lanes open for reinforcements and weapon supplies would be extremely difficult, especially with the US and Japanese navies breathing down its neck and blocking it in. Although China claims the Taiwan Strait to be part of its territorial waters and not international passage, it still doesn't change the fact that this is a waterway, and logistically during wartime is not an easy mass to defend. So it's basically a choke point that Taiwan's allies could use to intercept and cut off mainland forces over time. All it takes is the right amount of firepower. Unfortunately, a naval blockade works both ways, and closing the door to something going in closes it for everyone, which means that Taiwan's imports would also stop. Guerrilla warfare might be Taiwan's only chance of survival, but it would require supplies too. Taiwan would need to have enough ammunition stored on the island to sustain its campaign. Like Ukraine, Taiwan's best bet for surviving such an attack against all odds would depend on its capabilities of fighting asymmetric guerrilla warfare. Luckily, Taiwan's strategic planners have caught on to this wisdom. They are concentrating on amassing smaller weapons like drones and portable fighting equipment that soldiers can carry, such as Stinger missiles and armor-busting javelins. Any guerrilla fight would need to be sustained by Taiwan's allies from off the island. This brings us to the United States. As we've reviewed every possible scenario for Taiwan's defense, it's clear that this small country cannot survive without the backing of bigger, meaner bullies, just like in the case of Ukraine. A guerrilla enters the arena. Historically, the US has adopted a hazy and undefined approach in its support of Taiwan against constant Chinese aggression. This support has been genuine and always present, but never clearly outlined. It initially adopted a very cautious approach to the two countries through an even-handed approach, even going so far as to switch diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to Beijing, as China did in 1979. You see, Washington follows the One China policy, recognizing the People's Republic of China, or the mainland, as the sole legitimate government of China. It acknowledges that Taiwan is a part of China, but has never accepted the Chinese Communist Party's claim of sovereignty over the island. However, the US has shed its ambiguity lately and is hollering openly in its support for Taiwan. US President Joe Biden broke this ambiguity by repeatedly saying that he would use American troops to protect Taiwan very clearly. The Pelosi visit and the Taiwanese president's meeting with American officials were perhaps instances of Washington testing the Chinese resolve, with a bit of provocation. Even though the United States has still not officially recognized diplomatic relations with Taiwan, it remains Taiwan's guarantor of security and its best supplier of advanced weaponry. In fact, the US recently sent its guided missile destroyer, the USS John Finn, to the Taiwan Strait in March of 2024. In response, China condemned the move, accusing the US of violating international law and engaging in provocative behavior. The Chinese military then conducted a show of force, including military drills near the Taiwan Strait, as a form of retaliation. China emphasized that such actions by the US increased tensions in the region and undermined peace and stability. Now, one thing needs to be noted. If all-out war were to break out, it could be challenging to supply the island with weapons. Toward that end, Congress passed the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, which the president signed. This act included a section titled the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act. That section authorized $2 billion in grants and loans annually to Taiwan for 5 years, and $1 billion a year for military stockpiles to be sent to Taiwan in case of an emergency. Within that framework, the Biden administration recently approved potential arms sales to Taiwan worth $619 million, which made headlines worldwide. The deal would include hundreds of missiles for Taiwan's fleet of F-16 fighter jets. These steps would allow for the creation of a regional contingency or small arms stockpile within Taiwan. This would allow there to be a cache of weapons for use in case of a military conflict in which outside support finds itself blocked off. So you can see very clearly, even though the United States hasn't directly intervened between the two countries on Taiwan's behalf, it has been operating from the shadows to keep Taiwan safe. Even before it came out loud and clear in support, it was already providing what can only be called the American shield to Taiwan. This is the island chain strategy, which is essentially America's saber on China's throat. It serves as the cornerstone of America's plans to keep China in check, and Taiwan plays a central role in it. This strategy is composed of the first chain of defenses starting from the Kuril Islands, crossing the Japanese archipelago, the Ryukyu Islands, Taiwan, the northern Philippines, and Borneo, extending from the Kamchatka Peninsula in the northeast, before ending at the Malay Peninsula in the southwest. The first chain is further reinforced by a second island chain, formed by Japan's Bonin Islands and Volcano Islands, in addition to the Mariana Islands. The most notable is Guam, Western Caroline Islands, from where it extends to western New Guinea. This chain represents the eastern maritime boundary of the Philippine Sea and is used to curtail China's reach in that direction. Then there's also the third island chain, which begins at the Aleutian Islands and runs south across the center of the Pacific Ocean towards Oceania, passing through the Hawaiian Islands, American Samoa, and Fiji to reach New Zealand. Australia serves as the staple between the second and third chains. Contemporary strategists have suggested fourth and fifth island chains, which run through the Indian Ocean due to the growing Chinese interest in the region, while the proposed fourth chain would include places like Lakshadweep, the Maldives, and Diego Garcia, designed to disrupt the string of pearls waypoints towards the Persian Gulf, such as the Gwadar port and Hambantotay. The proposed fifth chain would originate from Camp Lemonnier in the Gulf of Aden, go around the Horn of Africa, run along the entire East African coastline through the Mozambique Channel towards South Africa to encircle the Chinese naval base at Doralé, Djibouti, thus sabotage China's trade with Africa. China has accused the United States of encircling it with a chain of heavily armed military bases stretching from Australia in the south to Japan in the north. Which is true, but you won't hear the US administration accept that accusation. It's a fact that's never spoken about. All these countries that are part of the chains enjoy good relations with the US while helping maintain American naval dominance in the Western Pacific Ocean. Within these chains, two locations besides Taiwan play an integral role. The first of these is this island, Okinawa. It's the smallest and least populated of the 5 main Japanese islands. Okinawa is approximately 66 miles long and 7 miles wide, with an area of 466 square miles. It's been a critical strategic location for the United States Armed Forces since the end of World War II. Around 26,000 U.S. military personnel are stationed on Okinawa today, comprising about half of the total United States forces in Japan, which are spread over 31 areas, 13 bases, and 48 training sites. The United States military installations cover approximately 25% of the island, making it the primary U.S. stronghold on the first island chain. And this is the island that supplements Okinawa. It's called Guam. Guam is the largest and southernmost island in the Mariana Islands chain, situated in the North Pacific Ocean. What's more, it belongs to the U.S. Like Okinawa, it hosts various American military installations like the Guam Naval Base located on Apra Harbor and on the Orate Peninsula. In 2009, it was combined with Andersen Air Force Base to form Joint Region Marianas, which is a Navy-controlled joint base. It's home to Commander Submarine Squadron 15, Coast Guard Sector Guam, and Naval Special Warfare Unit 1. It also supports 28 other tenant commands as well. It is the home base to dozens of Pacific Command, Pacific Fleet, 7th Fleet, and CB units operating as an extension of U.S. firepower. Both sit just east of the first island chain. Okinawa is home to approximately 26,000 U.S. military personnel, while Guam houses around 10,000. These strategic outposts provide the United States with the capability to respond swiftly and effectively to any regional conflict or crisis, which includes protecting Taiwan and any other significant ally when required. This island chain strategy can choke China by blocking its trade routes in case it misbehaves, and it has worked superbly so far. China has tried to break the chain by launching its own string of pearls strategy, a term that was first used in 2005. The strategy was dependent on setting up a string of bases stretching from the Middle East to southern China. These naval bases, or electronic eavesdropping posts, were built by the Chinese in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. It started off building an open seaport in Gwadar, Pakistan, but that move has been met with recent failure. Now, its only option remains to break that chain right where it matters the most, on its first and most important cornerstone, Taiwan. It's said by many that the US can always break China's back through the effective use of sanctions. However, Russia's example showed the world that sanctions take time to have an effect, and these days, they could also carry undesired effects. In the absence of a direct intervention by the US, Taiwan will fall before a suitable length of time passes for sanctions to work their magic, at least if implementing sanctions is the path pursued. One exciting fact works in China's favor. For an economy of its size, China has relatively limited external financial sector ties. It is the world's second largest economy and has the most significant volume of international goods trade, yet it ranks 8th and 9th in the world in terms of total external assets and liabilities. As of the end of 2022, China held 95% of its $3.3 trillion in foreign currency reserves, with the remaining held in gold. It's known to hold at least $1.1 trillion in US government bonds through US custodians, and some more, which are routed through custodians in Belgium. In addition, it also has about $300 billion in corporate debt and equity. Most of China's foreign currency reserves are held predominantly in euros, Japanese yen, and pound sterling. In addition to China's official reserves, China's banking sector holds $1.5 trillion in cross-border assets, according to State Administration of Foreign Exchange statistics, most of which is held in G7 currencies. Meanwhile, Chinese banks primarily borrow from Chinese domestic savers and do not depend heavily on foreign borrowing to maintain their balance sheets. However, the fact remains that global trade and the economy are hopelessly entwined with China, and sanctions on it will have severe consequences for the rest of the world. So, it might be used by the US as a last resort. Besides, US trade with China has grown enormously in recent decades and is crucial for both countries. Today, China is one of the largest export markets for US goods and services, and the United States is the top export market for China. This trade relationship has brought lower prices to US consumers and higher profits for American corporations, but it obviously comes with some costs related to dependencies between both nations. Meanwhile, Taiwan is China's fourth largest trading partner. The value of all cross-strait trade was $319 billion in 2022. Any sanction attempts would also hurt both these brother nations unbearably and still lead to major global market fluctuations. The China-Taiwan war theater. If all else fails, and no amount of reasonable concerns overshadow China's ambitions and obsessions, and it still invades Taiwan, how would that play out? Let's consider a mock, rough framework for battle that could ensue. This is just for fun. So, China would most likely concentrate its firepower on these islands, the Quemoy, the Penghu Islands, and a bunch of smaller islands peppering the Taiwan Strait. Quemoy will fall quickly, but the 64 Penghu Islands will put up a stiffer defense due to the presence of the Taiwanese Air Force on its 6 Skybow missile bases. But this too will eventually fall due to China's missile stockpile. Taiwan's 55,000 ground troops scattered over the 12 islands will be a piece of cake for China's massive military landing forces and its missiles. Short-range ballistic missiles will be launched from the recently expanded military airfields that sit inside the Chinese Fujian province, located in Hui'an, Zhengzhou, and Longtian, positioned within 200 miles of Taipei. These conquered islands will be used by Chinese troops as a launching pad to cross the rest of the the 170-mile-wide Taiwan Strait and get to the mainland. Up next, China's Shenyang J-16 and Sukhoi 30 multi-role fighter jets will launch a barrage of missiles on the islands. This will be followed by HN-2 cruise missiles finding their targets, decimating Taiwan's defenses there, as Taiwanese anti-air defenses have trouble detecting these cruise missiles since they remain within the Earth's atmosphere after launch. They're designed to have the capability of flying very low, with their next-generation terrain-hugging feature, which makes radar detection extremely tough. Next, China's naval formations will cross the Davis Line and enter Taiwan's waters. The Chinese Air Force takes off from Shandong before joining the Navy, targeting Taiwan's western front as the east of Taiwan is protected by its mountainous terrain. The west coast is heavily armored, but is too shallow for China's large ships to dock. However, Taiwan's defenses will not be able to withstand such an attack and will definitely fall in some time. Hopefully, by this time, the US will have to decide to either let Taiwan fall or rescue it. Most likely, they will opt to rescue. One decisive factor in this exchange, however, will be the expected blockade of the Taiwan Strait, which would cause untold damage to the world economy and block the supply of microchips to the world almost immediately. But the most worrying thing would be that China could possibly break through the first island chain, and the US would have no hope of containing it anymore if they don't react quickly enough. That would be a nightmare beyond compare. The US would need to exercise use of its trilateral agreement with South Korea and Japan, dragging them into an alliance to deal with China's invasion right away. By this time, China would probably surround the island with its naval fleet in preparation for the entry of Japan, South Korea, and most likely the US. The aim would be to launch a ground attack on the mainland and make sure that no aid gets through. As the Chinese Navy and military would blockade Taiwan, the US and its allies will have sent in its troops and supplies to Okinawa base. An intense battle would take place involving most of America's 11 aircraft carriers, along with Japan's fleet of 36 JMSDF destroyers providing support. The clash of titans would be on full display. It would be nothing short of brutal. Eventually, the US Navy will break through the blockade, overcoming the Chinese fleet due to the sheer tonnage and advanced weaponry at its disposal. On the other end of Taiwan, the PRC ground troops would be caught up in intense guerrilla warfare from Taiwanese troops, which have been trained explicitly for it. The US, Japanese, and South Korean vessels would eventually create a blockade for China, breaking its line of supply to the ground forces stranded on Taiwan. This would almost surely cause hostilities coming to an end with the survivors most likely surrendering, and that is a heck of a major caveat to this entire plot. Now, another thing we must note is that this was just a simple battle mock-up. It doesn't factor in a lot of allies that may almost surely join the fight if it were to break loose. War isn't simple. It's a never-ending chess game that's modified by the second, in an ongoing pursuit by either side. The gray zone. After having said it all, there is another tactic China could use, which might even be operational already. It could isolate Taiwan, cripple its economy, and bring the island to heel without the need for hostilities. That is, China could use a gray approach to arm wrestle Taiwan to follow its lead by quarantining it. The China Coast Guard could act more like a maritime militia to apply a full or partial quarantine of Taiwan, cutting off access to its ports and stopping vital supplies like energy from reaching the island's 23 million people. China Coast Guard numbers 150 ocean-going vessels and 400 smaller ones, making it one of the largest in the world. Also, Beijing's Maritime Safety Agency and Maritime Militia have hundreds of more vessels. Meanwhile, Taiwan's Coast Guard is only equipped with 10 ocean-going ships and about 160 smaller ones that don't have the capacity to dent a Chinese quarantine if it were to take place. This would adversely affect Taiwan's economy, with operators avoiding their ports for fear of having their assets seized by Chinese authorities. Already, vessel operators from the Philippines and Japan have made complaints with regards to China's strong-arm tactics, claiming that Taiwan is Chinese territory. China could require customs declarations to be filed before vessels can dock in Taiwan's ports, or it could just target the island's busiest port, Kaohsiung, responsible for 57% of Taiwan's maritime and energy imports, not letting vessels through, causing Taiwan trouble in conducting business. Again, just another hypothetical scenario. Or is it? Whatever the case may be, it's a chess game that's being played right in China's backyard. That makes a lot of factors lean in their favor. It's hard to say what they're thinking, but you can be sure that they have quite the strategy drawn up for this scenario. It will shock the world when it happens, even when it's expected. Enjoyed the video? Make sure you're subscribed, and click one of these thumbnails to dive right back into more mind-bending content. See you soon.